Hi, I'm Ann. I want to approach my part of our report by stating that God can use us even when we might feel unworthy or unqualified for his task. The way I came into this story began at the prayer seminar which Pastor John DeBell organized back in February. We were still sitting around the tables in the fellowship hall during a break. Carl looked straight at me and said, "Why don't you go to Macedonia with us?" His words resonated with me for two reasons. One, I had visited Greece as a tourist years ago, and two, many of you will recall the Apostle Paul's vision one night when he saw a man from Macedonia standing and begging him, saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." As I read through the book of Acts, I found a number of other references to Macedonia, and I paid more attention to the maps of Paul's missionary journeys. I felt that this was God's call for me. The Lord provided the necessary funds, and our plans took shape. There were some bumps along the way with the airline scheduling up to the week before we were to leave, but God worked those out too. It might be interesting for you to know that the sponsoring organization, World Missions Alliance, or WMA, had scheduled the September trip to Macedonia a full year earlier. All their other missions from March to September had been canceled due to the coronavirus pandemic sweeping the world. And furthermore, even as late as September, all the European Union countries were closed to visitors from the United States. But Macedonia is not part of the EU, so we were still allowed to enter the country. God's plan, God's timing. To encourage you to go on international mission trips, I will tell you about a word I had one day while talking with Carl. I lamented that I didn't feel that I had any real gifts or talents or skills for God to use on a mission. But Carl correctly pointed out that wasn't I questioning God's call for me to go? And wasn't I thinking that God didn't already have someone, or perhaps more than one person, who would need to hear exactly what I would say in telling them about God's love and plan for them? That laid my doubts to rest. Here is a brief story about two of those divine appointments God had for me on our long transatlantic flight aboard Turkish Airlines. I know that Debbie and Carl had encounters also. I had received a great aisle seat at the bulkhead, so I offered to trade with Carl, thinking it would give him more room for his long legs. That meant that I ended up on the aisle next to an Asian American woman in her early 30s. Her name also was Deb. And Ida, a 50-ish lady who sat next to the window. When I told Deb that I was with two companions going on a short missionary trip to Macedonia, her eyes lit up as she whispered to me a secret. She was going to live as a missionary to the Muslim population, either in Istanbul or Ankara, Turkey, for a year. Christian witnessing in Turkey can be very dangerous to all involved, hence her caution in speaking so softly to me. So, divine appointment number one was mutual encouragement for Deb and me on our respective missionary ventures. Then, Deb and I began to draw out our seatmate, Ida, a very intelligent, attractive woman with excellent English skills and a wealth of knowledge through her studies of many world religions. Remembering to begin where the person is, we ask Ida some questions about her faith, pointing out the difference between religion, man reaching up to God, and Christianity, God reaching down to man. Ida listened politely and even asked us some questions too, but we did not observe any softening of her spirit to see a need for change in her life or to pursue further a relationship with the Lord. Deb and I agreed together to continue to pray for her. So that was divine appointment number 2, planting seeds in the hopes of bringing another soul to the Lord. By the way, my new friend Deb told me that there were 30 of her team members on our flight. She said that the millennials in her church were on fire for the Lord. Wow, what an encouragement. What are some other reservations you might have about going on a mission trip yourself? Do you have age concerns? The oldest member of our team was a spunky 83-year-old lady from West Virginia. The youngest members were a young married couple from Cary, North Carolina. Do you have family concerns? The other couple in our team were in their 30s, 40s, with 3 children. And the day before they left home, they discovered that she was pregnant. Do you have adequacy concerns? Well, who is ever adequate in themselves? If you have felt God's tugging at your heart, you can trust Him. He will supply your confidence and those divine appointments. So God assembled a Macedonian team with members from all over the country. He orchestrates the composition of the team and which members should tell their stories and when they should do so. More about that later. WMA leaders had told us ahead of time to have several 5 to 10 minute testimonies or faith stories we could share, sometimes at a moment's notice. Such stories of faith journeys always lift us up to hear how God has worked in someone else's life. And so, we arrived in Givgilia in the Republic of North Macedonia in the evening and got in a good sleep before we began the next morning to ease into our adventure. After general introductions from each team member, we then each morning discussed the day's agenda and prayed together. That was one of the most powerful times for me personally, especially through the fervency and authority with which several of our members prayed for that church and for our mission. With COVID-19 restrictions in place, our outreach options were limited. Primarily, our focus was to come alongside the small evangelical church in which our WMA leader, Chuck Todd, had previously made contact with the pastor and his family. Our goal was to strengthen the brothers and sisters there and encourage them as they remain true to the faith, much as the first century apostles had done for the churches in their time. The pastor of the church there, Zoran Kolev, had been a policeman. He had become a follower of Christ after answered prayer for an amazing healing for his son when the boy was very young. His son, Mihail, is now the assistant pastor and song leader for their church. He was also our driver, guide, and chief translator. For our morning worship service, Zoran welcomed us and then delivered the sermon, which his wife Hilda translated into English for our team to understand. Another time, our leader Chuck gave the sermon while Hilda again translated it, this time back into the Macedonian language for the church members to understand him. Different team members also participated by giving their testimonies, and twice Debbie and Carl, or all 3 of us, sang during the service. It is well with my soul, great is thy faithfulness. Usually, after each of the worship and prayer meetings in their church, we offered to pray individually with anyone who desired prayer. 2 or 3 team members, working with a translator, would hear the person's request and then take turns praying. There were many seeking healing or the salvation of a family member. Carl actually had the opportunity to lead a man to Christ. We also encouraged those people to ask Pastor Zoran after we had left if they had more questions about their new faith. Several times we also split our team into smaller groups for worship services or simple times of individual prayer at different locations. Other times we visited some of the church families in their homes. Several of our team members had brought clothing to donate, especially to families with children. When our time came to an end in Gevgilia, we crammed all our luggage into the 2 vans and drove to Skopje, the capital of Macedonia. In the next days, we again visited and came alongside several of the evangelical churches there. Carl will be speaking about that. I truly do thank you all again for your part in sending us to encourage and work alongside some of the evangelical churches in Macedonia. I know that our good health, our safety, and the smoothness in travel were gracious answers to your prayer on our behalf. To God be the glory.